Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 379, featuring Jeff Stringer, Director of Production Technology over at Laika, who's a really great guy. I've actually known Jeff a long time ago, back when he was at DD. He was, I believe, the Director of Studio or something. I think that was his title, but he pretty much ran a lot of managed the studio and the resources of the studio on both sides of commercials and feature films. And he was really great. So I knew him back then. And it was really cool catching up with him. But he has been at Laika for the last 14 years and has been doing some really good stuff. And it was really a lot of fun catching up with Jeff, finding out about, his origin story, which is really cool and interesting. And you guys will definitely enjoy that. I didn't know all those things about him back when I knew him almost 20 years ago. But it was really cool to catch up. And then also a lot of the ins and outs of Laika and the stop motion studio over in Portland, Oregon, which obviously a lot of you guys know who Laika is. But it was really cool catching up with him. Kristen, what did you think of Jeff's podcast?
Well, yeah. So this podcast, we get to kind of hear why he moved on to Laika. Mm-hmm. He said he was kind of blown away by their ambition of just their idea to build a multi-production studio doing stop motion CG. And then he kind of discusses the 3D printing and their facial animation process, which is amazing in itself. And then he also discusses like their virtual art department, LED backlighting, and then their new movie Wildwood, which is based on a young adult fiction series. Of course, it's going to be a couple years till it's finished, but that movie is actually based in Portland, so they get to make little miniatures of that on set. So it's a really good podcast, especially for anyone interested in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really kind of cool to see that. I mean, I was very interested, obviously a stop motion studio or a studio mainly focused on stop motion, based on stop motion, tends to be a little different, even though they do a lot of CG in it. And they've done, obviously, you said they were using virtual art departments and LED backdrops. So all those things are very interesting. But in the context of a stop motion studio, it's really kind of great to see what they're doing. So really thank you so much, Jeff, for being on. And hopefully he promised me that he will get more people from Laika to be on the podcast as well at some point. So I'm excited to talk to them and find out what's going on over in Portland. Okay, we have an announcement. What's going on, Kristen?
Yeah, so you can find this out at chaos.com/events. So June 23rd, it's the Chaos Campus live show, and this will be episode 4. And we have guest Katia Kolevia, hope I said that correctly, and she will join Nikos for just an inspiring discussion about lighting design and being passionate about what you do. So again, June 23rd, and you can sign up at chaos.com/events.
Great. That's really cool. We don't have any specific product announcements just yet, but some big ones are coming soon, so stay tuned. But if people want to know more about the podcast, Kristen, where can they go?
You can go to facebook.com/CG Garage Podcast or chaos.com/CG Garage. And if you'd like to watch us, go to youtube.com/Chaos Group TV.
Perfect. And if you have any questions, comments, or ideas for other guests on the podcast, we would love to know. Just email us labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 379 with Jeff Stringer from Laika.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passe. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Listen, it was great seeing you at the VS. It was I hadn't seen you. It's been maybe 20 years.
Hopefully not that long. But yes, it seems like it. And it was great.
Yeah, it's been event. Absolutely. And it was really cool, to see you there. And I mean, obviously we've chatted here and there over email and stuff over the time. But first of all, you've been at Laika now for a long time, right?
Long time. Yeah. It's almost like it's its own career. I've been here 14 years. 14 years.
14 years. Yeah, that's kind of amazing. All right, but I do want to start with your, like, what I like to do is people's origin stories. And actually had Darren Grant on last week. And so he said, yeah, you should talk to Jack. Ask him about where he came from. Like, what's his origin story? So, like, how did you start getting into this? What sort of got you involved?
Yeah. It's kind of, I guess it's a good story. I mean, I was a film student in college. I wanted to be a filmmaker. I was excited about that. I went to a program at San Francisco State. It was a great program. It was called the Core. And there was only 20 students allowed in. You had to make a short film to get into this thing. And they focused on, experimental, avant-garde kinds of movie making and documentaries and, kind of non-commercial filmmaking.
Right.
Very San Francisco State kind of program. And it was awesome because there was such a small group of us. We got access to all the equipment that we needed. And the particular kinds of films I was making led me down a more technical path because I was doing these kind of, avant-garde things. I was inspired by the work of people like Maya Deren and Stan Brakhage. Maybe you've heard of those guys. Yeah. It was formalist kinds of filmmaking. But as a result, I learned how to use the high-speed camera. I learned how to use an optical printer. We had an optical printer. I did some visual effects with an optical printer. Which was kind of cool. This was the dark ages. We were working on 16 millimeter film, shooting with Rolexes, but it was a great education. And towards the end of that, I got involved with this theater company in San Francisco, which really opened a lot of doors for me. It's a company that you should definitely Google this. George Coates Performance Works. And it was during the 80s and 90s in San Francisco. George and his troupe of artists were making these very kind of large scale theatrical performances that mixed a bunch of medias. They were kind of immersive experiences. You could go in the theater and be surrounded with light and sound. And there was dancers, there was operatic musicians, singers, and we were mixing a bunch of things together. But he had this great theater down at 7th and Market in the basement of the Hastings Law School, if you've ever been to San Francisco.
Okay.
And it was a cathedral space. It had been a church that had been like, they put a false ceiling in and kind of hid it from everyone. It was but they opened it up and rented it out to George as a part of a settlement he got for having his last theater space damaged in the 1989 earthquake. So it was a well-funded theater all of a sudden with a great space. And so it was an opportunity actually to work there and actually get paid for doing this crazy artistic stuff. It was a cool outfit. My role there was to develop scenic projection, which was this, we were using stereo projection, so you can imagine a bunch of slide projectors with stereo polarized lenses on the front of them. And we went through kind of a series of images, and then we would place actors inside these images, live actors inside this 60-foot stage, vertical stage. It looked like an iPhone. This was the shape of our performance,
wow,
but 60 feet tall.
Wow.
And of course, nobody knew about the iPhones, but that just happened to be what we did. But it was a great experience because we got to mix together with a bunch of artists. My job was to kind of curate different images from different photographers in town and get them to put stuff up on the screen. And then George would pick out images that he liked, and we would mix them together with music and film. I would shoot high-speed effects and things to put on that screen. And there were a bunch of other crazy people working there involved in different kinds of art forms. But we also got interest from the local industry, because it was a nice space. And they would come and do events there. And one event in particular that's memorable was when Steve Jobs was not at Apple, but he was launching Next. And he had this new computer, that he was trying to launch. And they actually came to George Coates Theater to do the event. And it was the first time any of us had seen anything like that. This beautiful designed cube of a computer. It was a work of art, just the the chassis.
I know it well.
Well,
That's what I first learned how to do anything computer graphics was actually on a Next computer because I was using it for doing Mathematica back in school. It was magnesium. It was a really interesting design. Yeah.
okay, there you go. And so, they left it there. After they did their event, they left the computer. Nobody could use it. I mean, we didn't know how to do anything with it, but we started to invite local engineers to come by and kind of collaborate with us in the theater space. Right. And as a result, we had people from local software companies. There was a guy who used to come out from JPL, who was like an actual aerospace, rocket scientist. And he would teach us rudimentary Linux or IRIX commands. And so we all kind of got familiar with the tech through that experience. And we would put on these big shows. And one show we did was called Invisible Sight. It was a big hit. And it kind of did a parody or a, sort of an imagining of what the future would be like if we were all living in virtual worlds, which seemed to be where we were headed in the early 90s. And
still there.
Yeah, it was quite prescient and it was funny. And we got partially funded to finish the show by Silicon Graphics, big company at the time, right there in Mountain View. And they liked it so much that they invited us all out to SIGGRAPH. This is like 1991, I think, to put on the show for their developers. And so that was my first exposure to that world. I was coming from sort of creative filmmaking, experimental stuff with theater companies. And then suddenly, boom, here's this whole industry of people similar to us. It's kind of like going to a Grateful Dead show, SIGGRAPH in 1991.
Yeah.
but making a living and doing really fascinating things. So I kind of got my hooks in me there and started to track what was happening in that world.
Right.
And then I guess, it was time to make, a living. The theater paid, but not well enough to start a family. And I met my wife there at the theater. And so I went looking for a job. And I called up some of the people that we collaborated with in the theater. One of them was this guy named Bob Powell, who was an engineer that worked at Chaos Inc. May remember it starts with an X, XAOS, right? It's how they spelled it, not like your chaos, but Chaos.
Right.
And it was a great company that had figured out a software development program for doing morphs. You probably remember morphs, on TV. Kind of took over for a period of time, and they had some other cool effects too. And they decided to spin off a company to sell the software to other broadcast companies, and that became Chaos Tools. And
okay,
do you remember Chaos?
It's familiar. I mean, I remember what was the Electric Image was one I remember. Yeah.
Some of those guys they were around the same time. Some of our team ended up working over there, but yeah, so the job was come and help us market this software. It was called Pandemonium.
Okay.
And there was another package called Entitle, which was basically just a Chiron, character generator, but for an SGI computer.
Right.
So you can imagine this was like a big deal because, the broadcast world was operating, on like standalone dedicated equipment for doing all these things. And suddenly you could buy a computer and maybe put some software on it and do all kinds of new things like morphs or, character generating. And so my job was to call all those companies that did, broadcast commercial spots around the West Coast and try to get them to use that software. So that was another, kind of great education into this world of doing visual effects and design. Right. And
so you were selling software, basically.
Yeah. And I got to go to all the trade shows. I went to, NAB and SIGGRAPH multiple times to sell the software and kind of opened up more doors of like, wow, there's all this amazing stuff going on in this world. I remember noticing how different NAB was from SIGGRAPH. You go there and it's like, SIGGRAPH is like, very creatively driven, not necessarily thinking about the market potential of everything that's happening. But at NAB, it was about the money, and it was about, like making a business of this.
Right.
People would show up with wads of cash to buy software, because that's how it worked,
Yep.
So that was a fascinating time. And the company, it was venture funded. I think we spun through the money pretty quick, and we didn't have a second product. So they decided to change their business model anyway. I wasn't a great salesman anyway. It was not really my calling. But I did meet a lot of customers. And before they rolled me off, that's where I went looking for a job next. It was like, okay, who did I like of all these people that I called?
Right.
And the next company I found was Atari, right there in San Jose. And they were called, at the time, they were under the banner of Time Warner Interactive.
Okay.
So the glory days of Atari were long past. But they were still making some great arcade games. They had these, the kind of stuff you could still find in arcades today. Actually, I think some of the games I worked on are still there.
Wow.
And they had set up a new team called the Video Lab that was experimenting with ways to use video to, instead of sprite animation for characters.
Okay.
And so that was my next gig. And it was a great one too. I mean, they had a great budget. It was a super creative team. And what I got to do in particular was to build a motion capture studio, one of the first, I think, out there. I think it was a Vicon system. And we would capture motion and put that into the games. But also we set up this giant kind of psych green screen space, a full-on 360 surround green screen, and then put cameras in the walls and would shoot, basketball players and different kinds of things. The one game that you can maybe still see out there that was made this way is a game called Area 51. It's a shooter. Have you heard of it? Have you seen it? No, well, some people may have. I think it's still around. And all the characters in it were video, except for these little villain characters that were supposed to be aliens. Those characters were stop motion animated.
Okay.
So, the game that kind of pioneered that workflow was called Primal Rage. It's another one that's still out there.
Okay.
I was working with stop motion animators on little tiny stages. There was this legendary animator named Pete Kleinow doing the dinosaurs. And he also did the little alien creatures for Area 51. And my job was really just to make sure the stuff worked. There was a team of about 5 of us there learning different things, getting the images into the pipeline for the game developers. And it's a very programming centric kind of environment.
Right.
We were in service of that.
So this was your foray into the beginning of visual effects and stop motion was through Atari.
It's interesting. The stop motion was there from day one,
right?
And it's still there today. I think I really liked working with those guys.
Yeah.
But that was also a couple of years. And then the big opportunity, there's a company in town called Tippett Studio. Yep. And stop motion legend, Phil, and they had just booked somehow the work to do the creatures, the bugs for Starship Troopers.
Oh.
And, so a friend of mine who had heard about this, who was working with us at Atari, a woman named Suzanne Lowe, she also worked at Chaos, so she kind of kept in touch over the years. She was like, we got to go over there and we got to apply. They're going to hire a bunch of people. It's going to be great. They're going to do this movie. Paul Verhoeven, obviously, was the director. They had a relationship with Tippett from the RoboCop days, and they had this huge task to do these digital creatures, and no idea how they were going to do it. Really, I mean, there was like a handful of people who had done a proof of concept, and they got the gig. So they had to build everything from scratch. Full on digital infrastructure, hire all the talent. And I went in and interviewed to be a coordinator or something. I was like, what can I do? What I know. And I guess I did a good interview because Jules, Phil's partner at the time, she was like, why don't you come in and manage operations for us?
Wow.
I know, it was hilarious. I was like, okay, yeah, I could do that, sure. And if I had known what I was getting into, I would not have done it. But
Okay.
it was a mountain of work and a bunch of unknowns, but ended up being, making a career for me. I mean, it was a great experience and a great team. I mean, they had such a strong core creative team there. Um, there was Phil, obviously, and Craig Hayes who were kind of running things creatively. And then there was also, some people. There was an animator there who, Adam Valdez, who's now like, a major, visual effects supervisor. I think he's at MPC now. He's been on a million projects. He's won Oscars. And he was an
Right.
animator there who was just curious minded. And he got involved in everything. He helped troubleshoot and fix things. And we were all just figuring it out. There was no blueprints for how to do it, for sure.
Yep.
We were scanning film and recording film, and that was one of the biggest headaches, frankly, was how to do that properly, so that the images looked right. We had this problem with like red flare around certain highlight images that we couldn't figure out. I think Adam got involved in that one and helped figure it out. But yeah, we had to kind of put that whole studio together from scratch, and it worked. The movie came out. The creatures looked awesome. So yeah, that's from that point on, I'm kind of in the stream of visual effects.
Right. Okay. So what else did you do besides Starship Troopers at Tippett? What were the other projects you worked on?
Yeah, there was a very important time right after Troopers when Troopers was set up as a Sony Pictures operation, kind of within Tippett, and so our employer was Sony, even though we were doing everything with Tippett, and we bought all the computers, Silicon Graphics computers, super huge budget just for the equipment. The people at the time were less expensive than the computers, and we recruited a great team, mostly from the fallout of the CD-ROM kind of era in San Francisco, where there was a bunch of work being done by graphic artists and this kind of higher level tech work. And those people became our compositors and our rotoscopers. And then we found 3D people who learned their skills. There was a great technical guy there, Doug Epps. He's another guy you should talk to. He's got a good perspective on this industry.
Okay.
And he built the pipeline for Tippett Studio, all the software and so on.
Right.
But when the movie finished, there was this moment of like, okay, are we done? Is this over? I mean, we built this great studio. We want to keep going. So we negotiated to buy everything from Sony. And I got to get involved in that, which was a lot of fun, just to kind of make a deal to keep the computers. And we had a great deal. And then we just had to book some projects, which wasn't hard. I mean, Phil, was a in-demand supervisor. So we worked on My Favorite Martian, a movie called Virus, which was really fun. We usually got hired to do creature and animation work. And we were able to build on that. There was another fun project called Komodo Dragon or something like that, another creature spot. And it was going pretty well. I think the company was growing. We were continuing to book work. They're still going strong today. It's a great company. But I got a little bit restless. I was looking for, I think what happened, honestly, was there was this moment where we kind of had a gap. It's a famous problem in visual effects where you're kind of going strong, you get a lot of people, and then you run into like, oh, this project isn't booked until then, or it's not, we don't know if it's going to book, and what do you do? And so we did have to kind of lay off a bunch of people. And I didn't think, I was new to this business. The business was new to the world. No one knew how this stuff worked. And I thought, boy, that's bad. I don't want to go through that again. I mean, like I had to personally talk to all these people because that was my role. It was one of those places where you had to wear a lot of hats. I was doing HR, I was doing systems, I was doing software engineering. But yeah, that got my attention. I was like, well, we need to have more types of projects. We need commercials. We need, we need a way to keep this engine running all the time. It was a big motivator for me at the time. And I think it was through a salary survey. It This was an early industry thing. There's a survey out there where the companies will blindly contribute information about their roles and all the different positions that we have, and then what we pay people. And it's blind, so there's no collaboration or anything. But people get data that way, and they can tell, like, am I paying market? Am I in the market? Or like, where's the market going? And I went to one of those meetings, the first one of its kind, I think. The survey was called Dunlap Survey, and it was held at Pixar. And all these HR and, kind of operations people from other studios had showed up. And there was a woman there from Digital Domain, and we got to talking, and she was like, oh, there's this thing happening where we need a person to do X, Y, and Z. And I pursued that and decided to move down to LA and, join Digital Domain.
Okay. Now, so you had always been sort of up in the Bay Area this whole time. So going to LA was a big move, right?
It was. That's a good topic. My wife did not speak to me for like a good solid, long time. She was so upset about the prospect. And of course, in the Bay Area, people do tend to get a little snobby about the South for some reason. I don't get it. I never did get it. Even when I was there, I was like, what's the problem? The weather's a little nicer. There's a lot of work down there. So yeah, we went and ultimately Gina did adjust. She loved it after a while. LA's great. And if you live in the right parts, which to me was the West Side, like I lived, I could walk to Digital Domain, so
right.
It was great.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. So you got to DD, and what did you start off? What was your role at DD when you first started there?
Yeah, I came in as the director of digital production, they called it.
Okay.
That was it. Yeah. So they had this concept at DD, and this, by the way, was a great education for me too, because Tippett, we had kind of invented a structure, and we came up against all those problems that every company has, where you've got these strong creative people, but now we've got an organization to run too. How do we manage people and have strong creatives? Oh, can we have them do both? It turns out, no, you can't really have them do both. It's not great. But people continue to try to this day. That's a problem in a lot of studios. And it's hard because it costs money, to have these extra people. But so when I went to DD, one of the things I was looking for was how do we get better at this organizational structure? How do we build it so that it's stronger and more resilient, and we support the creatives a little better? And this role was perfect for that. It was all about managing, the artist and kind of building those teams. The idea was to cultivate the talent, kind of create a pipeline for people to come in at entry level and become supervisors, make sure that we had enough people for all the work that was being booked. There was two really influential people for me, running the different divisions. There was Nancy Bernstein and Ed Ulbrich, in charge of their respective divisions. And they would just, they wanted the freedom to go out with their supervisors, their top tier people, and book work. And they wanted no limits. They wanted to book as much work as they could get, because that's the way it works. You gotta do that. And so my job was to make sure that whatever they booked was actually doable, that we could back it up with like a team and some resources and methods and so on. And that's a complicated problem, because you don't want to, you can't afford to have like resources sitting and waiting. So you've got this constant game of like keeping it right sized and investing in the stuff that's going to help you book the next job, in terms of technology and developments. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a challenging thing. I mean, that was, it's such a feast or famine type scenario, in visual effect. And even, in the commercial, if you do broadcast, I was just having this conversation with one of the founders of Zoic. It's like in the commercials, when they did broadcast TV, it was, you have your pilots, and then you have all this stuff, and then everything dies down, and then you have to let go of everyone. But in the same time, like DD was booking all of these great, really big visual effects type movies, but then those movies came out in the summer because it was the summer blockbuster, and in the summer it was this lull of work, right?
Yeah, the tide tended to go in and out a little bit, but it was much more manageable than it had been at the smaller Tippett studio because we had more great supervisors to do more great work, and the commercial division was really a big part of that. I think that was one of the things that I got directly involved in almost immediately when I got there, was trying to create a stable, kind of group just for commercials. There was people embedded in features that were available sometimes, but if you book them to a long feature, suddenly Ed has no one, and it was so, people like Eric Barba he was sort of the linchpin for that group, and he ended up, of course, developing relationships with the great directors that he was working with and bringing features over as well. So that turned out to be smart, because those relationships in the commercial division could lead to great feature work as well. But yeah, we tinkered constantly with the way things were set up, and I don't know. I mean, this is all just sort of management inside baseball stuff, but I think one of the things I liked about what Scott Ross had done with Digital Domain was he set up this classic sort of matrix structure, where you had forces kind of working, sort of at odds with each other, but that was what kept it stable. So you had producers, and producers care about their show. I care about my show if I'm a producer, I want the best people, and I want them early and available and standing by for me. And then you have department managers and department heads on the other side who are like, I need to keep the best talent available for whatever comes my way. So those things kind of are a natural tension. And the way that we, kind of resolved it was to insist on really good scheduling and really good planning practices for production. If you want an artist, you've got to have a plan for your production, or you can't get them, because we're not going to hold them for you. Anyway, it was constant battles like that. It was not like an ugly battle, but there was, I think a smart tension to kind of keep the producers honest with this is a real show, this is a real plan, this is really booked, this is happening, here's my schedule. And the department heads, were like, if they had that, they had to supply the people. So the recruiting engine was always going.
I think what was interesting about DD at the time is that, there wasn't that many visual effects schools as there is today, or things of that nature, right? People learned that stuff on their own, et cetera. But what was so impressive about DD is that DD seemed to find the right people that were pretty junior, or this was their first job in visual effects. And they always found the best junior people possible. I don't know what secret sauce was available, but it was pretty incredible that you managed to do that really well.
I can tell you what the secret sauce was. It was fun. It was a fun place to work, and I think that just brought in a lot of options for us. People wanted to be there. It was we're starting out. It was definitely a place to be. And there was a lot of freedom too, for people to kind of rise to their own watermark and become good at something that they didn't start out being good at. And there was enough structure that it wasn't risky. I mean, the place, it was remarkable at how it could manage to kind of keep going on that margin, that razor thin margin between what it costs to do something. And I think the other secret sauce they had or have is the quality of the work. That was always the main thing, and it was something both Nancy and Ed believed in as the way we get the next show is to make this one the best, and that definitely went all the way down. So yeah, we did have a great culture too. I mean, it was a fun place to work. You were there. You remember.
I was there through three iterations of Digital Domain, so I definitely remember that one. And I was there. I was there during the Martini Night days, right? And we had Evan Jacobs invited me. You had started some committee about culture at DD, and Evan Jake was like, Chris, you should join because you're always very vocal about this stuff and you're very excited. And something came up about Martini Night, and you said, I don't think we need to do anything about Martini Night. It's operating just fine.
Well, yeah. That was good while I was there. I think it did eventually run its course after I left.
It did run its course, which is what it should do. But it was fun to have that thing. But I think at a certain time, like there was that made DD exciting. People knew about it, and that was a place, a destination to be. And I've met so many interesting people there and had great conversations with people. Like it was the first place I met Paul DeBevic, and who else was there?
People would come for that event. It was like I wish I could remember. You probably do. Hopefully you do. What were the name of the two guys that started that?
It's Rocco and Steve Blakey.
Yeah, Rocco Blakey. Those guys were legends. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was one of those things. They came to us and kind of, they weren't really asking permission, but they were kind of, they had to. I mean, they were going to do it at DD.
Right.
And they were very good at making their case and just being cool about it, and they ran it smooth. I think they hired people to come in. I mean, it was well done, and they kept it kind of at a reasonable level. I think things kind of escalated over time, but
but they kept it. They try to keep it in a good space. That's right.
It was a classy event for a while.
Yeah, I think one of the times I remember, like Volker Engel was there. And he used to drive a DeLorean. I don't know if you remember, but his DeLorean license plate said VFX ID4 on it. It was hilarious. But I get a ride in his DeLorean, which was like, great. He took it around the block. I've never been in a DeLorean before.
Yeah, after a martini, too. So.
Yeah, I know. So, well, different times. But now I do want to make sure we get into talk about Laika and all the amazing things you've done there. So you said you've been there for 14 years, so which is a substantial. So a lot, like, first of all, what drove the decision to go up there and do the things you're doing there?
Well, that's probably its whole podcast. But that was, another one of those. I've been at DD for a long time. I kind of ended up running the what they call the digital studio, and so I had oversight over technology too. And there was a shift with the sale. The ownership changed. Which was something that it was kind of like a timed out thing. I mean, like Scott Ross should explain that one to you, but they did have to bring in somebody, there needed to be some new people at the table in order to keep the thing going. And the people that came in were fine. I got along with Texter. I thought he was a great, visionary of a sort. And then they brought in some new blood in terms of leadership. The trio from ILM with, and Kim Library and Cliff Plummer coming in. So my role was changing, and I was looking at, maybe I've run the course here. Maybe it's time for something new. I did stick with it for another year after that, and kind of ended up in this. I was like the guy who was the way things used to be done, and the way things going to be done was the future. And yet I was the one also where everyone knew, where he sat and how to come and talk to him and complain about shit. So I basically was that. I got tiresome after a while. It's like I can't really steer anymore, but I certainly have to hear about it from everybody.
Right.
So I started to look around. I almost went to DreamWorks, but I did meet some people at Laika during one of the SIGGRAPH years. There was a programmer, John Pearson, who actually had been at DD, and he connected me with some folks there. And I was just blown away by their, the ambition of their plans. They had kind of an idea to build this, multi-production studio doing stop motion and CG. I loved stop motion. I loved the whole idea. And I had been to visit Benton before, when it was just Will Benton, and knew about the kind of, it was a cool team. It was a cool creative team. You could tell they had the sort of the right base ingredients. And if the mission was build this into a major studio, I wanted in. That sounded fun to me.
Benton did the California Raisins. That's one of the things that they were famous for, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was a Portland company for going back 25 years or so. And Travis Knight was an animator there, an intern, learned animation there.
Wow.
you know that story. There's a whole story. But
And Travis Knight is related to Phil Knight.
he is the CEO. He is the guy who runs Laika. You know, Travis Knight is the creative visionary and the owner, really. I mean, it's a Knight family thing, but Travis is running the place day to day. So anyway, that seemed like a good gig, and I made the move. My kids.
How did your wife feel about that move now?
It was at this point I had earned a little trust. You know?
Okay.
She was like, okay, we'll give this a try, and it has worked out great. I mean, I love Portland; it's a great city, and it was a good change of pace. You know, LA is also wonderful, but it seems like no matter what you do in LA, you're still, you know, trying to get, you know, your head above water. And so, yeah, there was a lot of attractive things about coming up here. And the work was particularly interesting. You know, like it was the thing I love to do, which is like build an organizational structure, you know, figure out what the technology sort of infrastructure needs to be to support this creative vision. Very ambitious. I have to say though, like it was not like wasn't a break from the intensity of DD, which I kind of thought it might be. I thought, oh, this will be like, you know, they make the whole movie, it moves slower, you know, doing 5-6 projects at once. Turned out to be just as intense because, you know, startups are hard. You know, it's like it's a hard thing to do. And this was very much a startup, even though it was well funded at the time. You still got to figure out how to do it, you know, how to do all this stuff. And there were a lot of different ideas about what should be done. And so when Coraline wrapped, I came in just at the end of Coraline. Mm-hmm. Coraline wrapped. The vision of doing multiple productions, of doing like CG and stop motion, that kind of all collapsed into one vision, which was Travis's vision. Of let's just get back to basics and make stop motion movies, the best stop motion movies we can make, right? And focus on our core strengths. And he felt like we were getting a little too spread out. And I think that was probably right on. I mean, when I got there, there was a team of, I have to say, maybe 50 TDs, you know, working on a pipeline for a movie that didn't exist, you know. And so there was just some stuff that was going off target. And you've seen how that happens, you know, like I think of Bob Zemeckis's place in Novato, you know, that was a huge operation to build a pipeline that was a very smart, you know, like kind of approach to filmmaking. But without the films coming into it, what do you do with it, you know? Right. And it kind of had that feel. And so they reorged, they changed everything. And I think my role, I sharpened it. I was like, okay, well, what can I do with this new vision? And my pitch was, well, let's keep some of these smart TDs. I mean, there's a good team of TDs here. Let's keep as many of them as we can to like build a technology, you know, process for stop motion filmmaking. You know, there's got to be things we can do better on stop motion. And in fact, there were a lot of things. I mean, there was you know, there was no real color pipeline. There was, you know, no real database. You know, people were keeping things on their desktops, and you know, there was no even understanding of a directory structure. You know, so we started from the basics. It was a great team of people. Rob Blau was there with me, and I think you probably know him. He's gone on to do other things with Shotgun and so on. Yep. But yeah, we over the course of Paranorman and Box Trolls, we built out, you know, technology as a resource for stop motion filmmaking. Right. And there was also a parallel effort at the time to make visual effects something that was, you know, a bigger part of the films. You know, I think on Coraline, everything was about doing it in camera. Visual effects was a really good comp team, you know, cleaning up the shots. There was minimal, if any, CG elements. And so that was something that some of us wanted to see grow and some of us didn't. There was some tension there, but it was, you know, healthy because nobody wanted to stray from what made the films beautiful, but it was, how do we make this fit in?
Right.
And do more. And over the years, that has developed into a real consensus of what we're doing, which is making these hybrid films. And visual effects under the leadership of Steve Emerson. He was there on Coraline, and he stuck with it. He has really established it as an equal partner, on the films. And they're in early. I mean, it's a dream. For a visual effects person, it's a dream, because you're part of the process from day one, from the storyboards, and it's not like getting a huge turnover, with a bunch of, stuff that doesn't cut together very well, and they missed a few points, they missed this and that, and you've got to all make it work. This is an opportunity to be there when they shoot it, and and plus the actors don't move, unless the animator moves them. So you can pop in little green screens when you need to, and you can do all kinds of cool things to make things come together later. But yeah, I think that's been the mission. I think it really took off on Kubo. Kubo is the film where we got nominated for a visual effects Oscar.
Yeah.
And it's
so you guys, I mean, what are you doing? I mean, obviously your character is still all stop motion animated, right? But you've supplemented with not all of them.
Yeah, I mean, the hero characters are, and every character is designed that way, as if, but if you look at the films, you'll see, Paranorman, for example, there was like a crowd scene in a city where there was like a little mini riot of some sort, but it was really as many puppets as an animator could animate.
Right.
It was several animators on the stage, and there's only so many puppets you could animate by hand in a shot, and I think that one was like a peak for the practical puppet, shot with a crowd. So on later films, as we had bigger crowd scenes, bigger vistas, and the filmmakers wanted to, make bigger films, CG became a bigger part of it. And the team, the visual effects team is excellent at fitting in, and that's essentially what visual effects is all about. It's like,
yes,
show me something, and I will match it.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I love what you guys, obviously, I mean, Laika's an amazing studio and does great stuff. And so I'm always very impressed with the Laika film. So I'm very excited about it. Now, I was reading somewhere that you guys were starting to look at some other technology, which you were using for stop motion, using 3D printing and certain areas like that. So can you tell us a little bit about that? That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, that is a whole section of our filmmaking process, and it's the facial animation process, essentially, right? So the idea is that instead of building a mechanical rig for a puppet and animating a face by hand, which limits the range of expressions and kind of what the puppet can do, because just naturally, what can you build an armature that can do, and that a hand can animate at that size. The idea, brilliant idea by a couple of guys back on Coraline, Martin Meunier and Brian McLean, who started this department. They were like, well, let's use replacement animation, which is basically, I'll put a shape on, and then I'll take a picture, and then I'll take that shape off and put another shape on and take another picture. So you're not animating the face, you're using these prints as different, steps in the performance.
Right.
So that was hugely successful. I mean, the puppets were very expressive. They seemed more real. You could connect with them better. The director loved it. Travis loved it. And so that's developed over the years. And it's quite a technical marvel. I mean, at this point, back then we were doing kits of faces, right? So you'd have like a limited range still, because you can only manage so many prints. I mean, the prints took a long time. We only had 1 or 2 printers at the time.
Right.
But now we've got a fleet of printers, and we're doing basically a bespoke performance for every shot. We just print faces. So there's tens of thousands of faces, and that's its own technical challenge to try to organize all those faces so that the animators get the right ones for the right shots. And
that's amazing. So every frame is uniquely printed.
Yeah, it's animated in Maya. The Maya performances are approved by the director, and then they are printed as whatever they put in there. And so there's a lot of rigging work that goes into making that possible.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And where are some of the best places we could see some of those performances?
I mean, all the movies.
Okay.
The thing I would do is just look up, the behind the scenes videos.
Got it.
For any of the movies. There's a lot that was shot for Kubo, a lot that was shot for Missing Link that shows the process completely from beginning to end, and you can see exactly how it works. That's a definite area of growth. The other big area of growth for us technologically is, so we do a lot of fabrication. We build sets. We have carpenters, we have seamstresses, we have people who develop fabrics, and we have puppets that are little engineering marvels of themselves. Like their armatures inside, and these are all designed and printed, or not printed, but machined in metal parts. And over the years, that process has been very traditional in terms of its fabrication methods, and we are in a shift right now towards making as much of that digital as possible, so that at the beginning of the film, we're working from a database of armatures and types of mechanical designs inside the puppets that can be extended on and reused, and also deployed into digital assets in the visual effects department, and to do simple rigging and things like that. So the puppets are more and more, the digital process is more and more embedded in how we make the puppets.
Mm-hmm.
And in the set department, this is the big focus, like right now on this film. We're trying to bring a digital asset into the production design process, so that they, instead of doing illustrations and then handing them to a set designer who breaks it down into drawings for carpenters, that will continue. But we'd like to also have a digital environment that before you build anything, you can go in and change the lighting and play around with the camera angles, put it in Unreal Engine, and explore and kind of make decisions on what you want to build, and be a little bit more effective with making those decisions earlier in the process. And also keeping that asset continuity all the way through to visual effects, and potentially also onto virtual stages, which is experimenting with now.
Yeah, well, you're speaking my language, because I love that idea of keeping everything continuous in that way, and I think it's really important. So, I mean, virtual art departments are great, and it's great that you guys are sort of exploring that. It totally makes sense, see it before you build it, in a lot of ways. But yeah, I heard Darren was mentioning that you guys are doing LED, backlighting in a lot of ways and stuff like that. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it is in the early stages, but we're totally doing it. We've jumped in with both feet. I mean, this was one of those things that we started to see at SIGGRAPH every year, how everybody else was starting to do in-camera visual effects, and the work at ILM, a few years ago that was shown, I was like, wait a second, that's our thing. We do in-camera. And at the same time as big studios like ILM and DD were moving towards this virtual in-camera style, we were actually shooting more green screens. We were actually layering things more, and struggling with capturing enough elements together at one time, because the elements are so hard to deliver in a timely manner.
Right.
So it became a mission for us. Like, wait a second, we can do this too. We can get in this game because that's what we do. We're in camera. We're all the time in camera. And,
right.
And so, yeah, we had the guys from Epic come out. Kim LeBerry came out and helped me do a little dog and pony kind of presentation to the key creatives about what was possible, and people bought into it right away.
Sure.
Our main producer, Ariane Suttner, the head of production, she was like, let's figure this out. And so we're doing it on this current movie. We do have a shot that we're working on right now with a digital asset and puppets in the foreground, and an animated truck. And it's a bitch. It's a challenge. I have to tell you, there's a lot of shit to figure out. I mean, we're working hard to keep the whole asset development work in the USD pipeline that we use for visual effects.
Oh,
so
nice.
so that we can easily jump into the virtual stage. And all that's technically, supported, but it's
We have a lot to talk about. I can tell you, I've been down the rabbit hole of USD. I've been down the rabbit hole of virtual production, and it's all very exciting. So I actually probably should tell you a little bit more offline about what's going on with us, because you might be interested to find out about that.
Yeah. I'd love to hear that.
But yeah, it's amazing. So what is can you tell us what the name of the movie you're working on now, and what can you look forward to?
I'm glad to say I can. It's because we're announcing stuff. We're talking about stuff these days, and this movie's been announced. It's called Wildwood. It's based on a young adult fiction series written by Colin McElroy, who was a member of the Decemberists. It's a band that
Yes.
he was a founding member. I think it's him and his wife that run that band. But it's a great story. It takes place in Portland.
Yep.
And which is really fun for our crew, because we're basically recreating Portland in miniature and shooting scenes in it. And we're going to be working on it for a couple of years, so you'll see it in hopefully 2024. I don't know,
Okay.
It'll be a while, but at the same time, we've announced some other projects that are in development, and the studio is super ambitious right now.
Nice.
So our studio is going to be supporting live action films as well, I think, in the future.
Okay.
It's a very interesting time at Laika.
Great.
We've actually been bringing in some new folks. We have Jonathan Gerber up here now.
I saw that.
Yeah. And Brandon Ashworth, you may remember him. He's
Okay.
also,
Yeah.
Yeah. And anyway, there's a lot of growth going on. A lot of different.
That's awesome. I actually wanted to have Jonathan on the podcast as well at some point. So
yeah, you'll have to reach out to him and hear his story.
Yeah.
Doing the work that needs to be done. As I was explaining, we've got this whole push to do digital assets across the board, right?
Right.
And it's it's hard to get everybody to agree on what an asset is. And he's digging into that.
That's cool.
Making it work. Yeah.
That's cool. Well, Jeff, thank you so much for being on here. I really appreciate it. It's awesome talking to you, hearing your story, and also, figuring out, what's going on at Laika and some of the amazing things you guys are doing. Very much looking forward to the next movie. Thanks so much for doing this.
It was my pleasure. Yeah, this podcast is cool. I'm glad you're doing it. It's a fun thing.